Welcome back, y'all. This is the Semi-Americans podcast.
Episode 3.5/4, I guess. 4?
Yeah, 3.5, 4.
Cool.
You have your host here.
What you going by with today?
I'm going to stick to it. I'm going to stick to Eduardo Ramirez.
All right. And I'm Amanuel B.
All right, so we want to thank the listeners. Made it through 3 episodes so far. We're on to the 4th. Thank you for everybody listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube.
Yeah, leave some ratings. Only 5 stars though. If it's less than that, don't leave it.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we've definitely been surprised by the feedback we've gotten so far and by the support. Yeah, thank you so much to everybody. Continue to spread the word if you can, and we look forward to continuing to put out more episodes as we move forward in this first season here.
Yep. Wanted to mention one thing. Of course, the last episode was named A Salvadorian Perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to name it One Salvadorian Perspective or One Salvadoran American Perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But to be clear, like, that's my experience of going through America.
Right.
And I think one of the biggest points of feedback that I got was somebody told me that even as immigrants, we have assumptions of the struggle that other people have gone through.
Mm-hmm.
But it is different. Even if, our parents all come from El Salvador or Ethiopian or
Right.
wherever.
Every experience is unique. Yeah.
Right. So one of the things that I was mentioning a lot last week was not being proud of being Salvadorian
Mm-hmm.
as a child. And I feel like other people have had experiences where they are more proud of that Salvadorian heritage, but
Mm-hmm.
that just wasn't something that I had gone through.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I just want to make sure, we'll expand on a couple other experiences of people from El Salvador and kind of see where those stories branch out.
Yeah. And I mean, even from other countries as well. I've had people reach out to me and say, hey, like, when can I get on the podcast? And I think that's something we're probably going to end up doing second half of this first season, right? So we'll definitely want other people's perspectives, and we're interested in learning about, other people's experiences during their time in the U.S. and even outside of the U.S. So definitely something that we have in store.
Yep.
Yeah. So last week's episode was, of course, your perspective. And then at the end of it, we kind of had like the cliffhanger where we were going to discuss my perspective as far as being black in America. So, as always, I think somebody else has said what I wanted to say in a better and a more eloquent way. I think, so I picked out 2 short clips. One of them is an excerpt from Emperor Haile Selassie's speech to the League of Nations back in 1937, after Italy had invaded Ethiopia for the second time. Here's the clip.
Until the philosophy which holds one race superior and another inferior is finally and permanently discredited and abandoned, until there are no longer first-class and second-class citizens of any nature, that until the color of a man's skin is of no more significance than the color of his eyes, that until the basic human rights are equally guaranteed to all without regard to race, that until that day, the dream of lasting peace and world citizenship and the rule of international morality will remain but a fleeting illusion to be pursued but never attained.
And the second clip is from about 20 years later, from a black American. And you already know I'm going to pick one of my favorite authors / activists. It's James Baldwin. And this is what he had to say.
What do you see? I don't know what white people see, when they look at a Negro anymore. But I do know very well that I realized when I was very young that whatever he was looking at, it wasn't me. It wasn't me. It was something he was afraid of. It was something to which he was attracted or which he found repulsive, but it wasn't me.
Okay, so what was it about these clips that kind of made you choose them for this?
Yeah. I think because of where I want to take this conversation today, I think I can't. Is that a bird? What is that?
All right, so we're back after some natural difficulties.
Man.
So you were saying these clips are regarding where you want to take the conversation today.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if we're like looking at it, I chose a clip from an Ethiopian, Emperor Haile Selassie, and then I chose a clip from a Black American, James Baldwin. So the reason why I felt like it was appropriate to do that is the conversation that we're gonna have today is gonna be centered around being both an African immigrant and being a Black American, so to speak, right? Even if I don't necessarily have the lineage or the ancestry. But I think, so the message was another part of it, right? The message in the first clip where, I was saying this to you earlier, it sounds similar to what you heard from MLK, right? So the sentiment has been present for such a long period of time. That was back in the 1930s, and then you hear MLK with his speeches, 20 something years later, and you hear Baldwin. I think that clip was from 1960, and he's expressing his perspective as far as being Black in America, and they're both covering the injustices that Black people face, not just in America, but globally as well, right? So when Italy invaded Ethiopia, and Ethiopia was a member of the League of Nations, it's supposed to be a collection of countries that are supposed to have each other's backs, but they didn't get any support from the Western powers, right? The ones that were at least militarily capable of helping at the time. And it took a while before Ethiopia received any aid. And the root cause for that colonialism that was going on in Africa the basis was race. So in the Baldwin clip, when he's speaking about whatever a white person sees in him is not him, that's probably a realization that took a while to get to, right? I think they both provide different perspectives, but the real issue is still race. That's what it comes down to. So I think both clips are more than relevant. They made me feel that these are issues that haven't been addressed still to this day, as we see, right, in our current times. I don't know, how did you feel hearing that? Because I mean, I'm hearing the emperor. I'm Ethiopian. Hearing the emperor is not like it's not new to me, right? Because I've heard speeches from him, or I've heard him talk, or provide his perspective. The Baldwin clip, like I said, I sit there and watch videos of Baldwin for hours. But from your perspective as someone who's not, who doesn't identify as Black, right? What were your thoughts on it?
Well, it's interesting, right? Because, like we mentioned last time around, the story is told by the victors, right? And I'm not sure about the entire Italy invading Ethiopia history or facts behind it or anything, but him mentioning, judgment based off the color of your skin, right? As an Ethiopian, it's interesting to think that there was some understanding of that at some level during that time. Right? Because Ethiopians, maybe there had been some trades with the Europeans and things like that. But once they started coming over, I'm not sure when they started communicating pretty heavily, but the fact that it was realized at that time in a nation that probably didn't have a huge white population.
What, Ethiopia?
Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't. But they saw what was going on in the rest of Africa. So during the time of colonialism, when they were dividing up Africa, it's not that Ethiopia had to fight off the Italians the first time around.
Oh.
Right. So it wasn't anything new for them. So they understood it, this construct of race and treating people differently from that.
I guess what I hadn't ever really thought of was specifically Ethiopia, a nation that I don't think has probably as much, or people that have experienced as much racism, but seeing it as a country looking out, outside of the borders. You're seeing racism happen outside of the borders, not within it. So you still have an understanding of it happening, but it's not a personal understanding, right? Whereas
it's not like within the country.
Right.
You're saying like it's not racism within Ethiopia. It's more.
Whereas when Ethiopians come here, they actually go through the experience of racism.
Right. Yeah. And that's something that we'll definitely get into. I think that will be part of this discussion and conversation. I've mentioned this to you before, as far as even the term like African American, and how I kind of see it like, at least all of this is my perspectives. So it doesn't have to be, it's just the way that I see it, or I've had conversations with people and I've gathered my thoughts to the point that I say, oh, okay, this is the way that I've like formed my reality around it. But the term African American, I think, is a degree of separation, right? So and we said this when it didn't make the cut last week because we wanted to split the episodes. But when you refer to your white American friends, you're not referring to them as European American, even if their lineage, everyone can claim like, Irish, German, whatever. If they're, white American, they can trace back their lineage or ancestry. But the way that it's perceived is like American, white.
Yep.
Whereas if it's black, it's like African American.
Yep.
That's just how it is. And it's truly like a degree of separation that they try to place on black Americans. Now, the irony is that there's not another group of people that has done more to build this country, both literally and figuratively. That's a fact, right? Like,
agreed.
We talked last time, like culturally, cuisine, yeah, professionally, socially, etc.
Entertainment.
Yep. I don't think that it's even controversial to say that black Americans, even by no choice of their own, are the most American.
Yep.
Like none of this today exists without the presence of black Americans. So who's really the most American? Even though they try to place that label of African American to try and, separate, because at this point, that connection with Africa, they've been ripped from their homeland, and that connection, unfortunately, is not as strong as it once was. But black Americans are truly, like, they are probably even have more of a part of the fabric of America than any other group.
The foundation, the structure, and then what's happened is that, the way that America, which, America, the government, America, the facade that they put out through like the Hollywood, movies, news, what have you, is, like you said, America,
Yeah.
white.
Yeah.
But it's just a facade when the structure and the foundation is built off of black culture,
Right.
black American culture.
Like, we have to give credit where it's due, right? There's no way that this country exists without black Americans. The crazy part about it is that historically America has been kinder to immigrants than it has been to its own black citizens. And you kind of touched upon this last time when you were discussing the American dream, right? And I guess in a way it does make sense that America will be kinder to immigrants because they're selling that American dream.
Right.
Hey, like, you can come to this country and you can work hard and, pull yourself up by your bootstrap, whatever the quote is, and you can become successful as long as you work hard. And both you and I know that's not always the case.
Yeah. No, definitely not.
Yeah, so I don't know. It's a interesting position to be in because I don't know how often other groups realize the contributions of black Americans to this country.
Right.
Right. I'm not saying anything special, really. I'm not. Like, I don't feel special saying any of this. I think for me it's obvious. I'm not necessarily. I mean, my perspective might be slightly different, but I think if you really look at it, it's almost an objective point of view.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what you're saying is completely true because they try to sell this American dream to immigrants coming into the country, and they say, hey, if you work hard and, you follow the American traditions, the American rules, you can become this glorified American, glorified white American.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you don't put in the effort to work in our system,
It's your fault.
it's your fault.
Yeah.
And then you're going to end up like Black
the
Americans.
Oppressed, right.
Yep.
The oppressed and,
And that's the thing. They've been oppressed constantly for decades, generations, hundreds of years.
Yeah. And I think it's important that you mention that because I think the disconnect between African immigrants and black Americans is an important part of the discussion. And I think the underlying cause for that disconnect between African immigrants and black Americans is this lack of recognizing the obstacles, as you just mentioned, the obstacles that black Americans have had to face, where, talking about generations upon generations of, racism, systemic oppression, discrimination, terror.
Lack of education.
Yeah. That has, for the most part, shut down upward mobility for such a significant portion of the black American population. Even speaking from a personal experience, a lot of times within the African immigrant community, there's a sense of we came here and we worked hard and figured it out, and why can't black Americans do the same? And that's completely flawed. And the truth is, immigrants oftentimes come here and what they're facing is a clean slate. It's a fresh start. It's a new start. Black Americans are not afforded the same opportunity. They've been dealing with oppression for generations. So there's kind of like this sense of disconnect that occurs, and it's, we're African and not black, and that like permeates, especially through the community of African immigrant parents. You see, like the children of immigrants are people like myself. We're more so immersed in the American culture, and we're more in touch and in tune with American history, right? So our perspective and our point of view is a little bit different, but for a lot of times for like African immigrant parents, they associate, again, they look at it from the American dream point of view, and it's like, work hard, you get to a point of success. I did it, you can too. That's not reality. Because that's not even a situation that Black Americans can relate to. It's not. If you're already starting off with generations and generations of being held back, how can you compare an immigrant that comes here to that situation? It doesn't equate. And I get it. The culture is different. The language is different. The upbringing is different for African immigrant parents versus, and not just parents. I mean, it sometimes extends to the children as well. But there are definite differences. But I think the sentiment is dangerous if you get to we're African and we're not Black. And I think what's even worse is that it's sometimes reinforced by white Americans. You know, I've had more than a few occasions where a white American, when I'm younger, I'm sure like they wouldn't feel comfortable saying something like that now. But when I was younger, they'd say, "Oh, you're Black, but you're not that type of Black." What does that even mean?
Yeah.
You know, I don't get that. I'm Black, but I'm not that type of Black.
Yeah.
Black is Black. You know, and I think the unifying fact is that we're Black first.
Right.
You heard me on the earlier episode, like I think it was on the second episode where I was saying, "Oh, my parents are from this ethnic group within Ethiopia, but we're Ethiopian first, right?"
Right.
But then even above that, we're Black first. You know, so like the overarching label is we're Black. And then I'm Ethiopian. And then we can get into, you know, everything else. Like racists won't look at me. Do you think a racist is going to look at me and a Black American and say, "Oh, but he's a different type of Black"? Like, yeah. No, they're gonna, in their eyes, we're both Black.
Yeah.
You know, so we're having to, you know, we're fighting the same battle.
So when did you first start noticing that, and how did that make you feel? Because as a child, you don't really understand how the world is kind of put together. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know even if you're mature for your age, even at, 7, 8, all the way through middle school, you're starting to get pointed out for, being Black. But at home, you're like very Ethiopian, speaking the language, eating the food, kind of living in that culture. Mm-hmm. And then in school, you went to a private middle school, for example, right?
Yeah, for a couple of years. Mm-hmm.
How did that come into your experience of like, oh, you're not really Black American, or what would be a Black American? You're an African American.
Mm-hmm. That's such a complex question, and I'll try my best to kind of like navigate through my thoughts as I answer it. If I ramble, just cut me off. No, but seriously, definitely, I want this to be more of a conversation than anything. Yep. And I've shared this story with you in the past, but not with the listeners, of course. One of the stories that stands out to me is when I was playing basketball out. And I think this was years ago. Like I was probably 13, maybe 14, something like that. There's this, I think he was like 20-something. He was this Black American guy. Somehow the conversation led to, I'm from Ethiopia. And his response was, "Yeah, you might be Ethiopian, but like, don't forget that you're Black." And it's kind of off-putting comment, right? It's weird to like hear something like that, because I'm like, what is he trying to get at? And what he was trying to get at is like, oh, Ethiopians act like they're not Black, right? And for me, I'd spent enough time at that point. I'd been in the States for like 6 years or whatever, that I already recognized, I considered myself Black. There was no difference between me and a Black American as far as like initially, right? Of course, there's differences culturally and all that, whatever. But at face value, That's our unifying fact, is that we're both black. And in that moment, with that comment that he made, like, it left me a little confused because I didn't fully grasp what he was trying to get at. But I've been comfortable feeling like I've been comfortable saying that I'm black. That's nothing new. There's definitely, don't get me wrong, now as you're growing up, there's definitely moments where you get a little bit confused because people will make comments, and back in the day I was a little sensitive probably, but not sensitive anymore.
Like, sensitive about what? Sensitive in
Sensitive
what
about
sense?
like the comments, like you mentioned the comment about like you mentioned about me going to private school for a couple of years, right? And I distinctly remember this kid. I remember his full name and everything. I won't say it here, but I remember him saying, and he was one of those white kids that was into hip hop, was like a diet Eminem, I guess, or whatever. And he was like, "Why don't you act black?"
Like, he had certain expectations of you based on what he'd seen,
right,
which was just entertainment.
Right, 100%. Right. So there's the attachment of certain qualities to black people, which are mostly negative anyway. Right. You're supposed to be tough, gangster, whatever. What he's seeing in the rap music or whatever, whatever entertainment he was consuming. And I remember being so upset. Like, I was mad. I was so upset. Because to me, it's like, what is that? What are you trying to say? Like, what does that even mean? Why don't you act black?
Yeah.
Is me being smart not acting black? Is me, like, working hard to get good grades that's not black? Like, we're equating everything that's the positive qualities, that's all white people. Was I acting black when I was winning all these awards? These academic awards black enough for you? I don't know. Maybe I should have asked him.
You could still ask him.
Yeah, if I see him. And what you have to realize, look, you'll face enough of that, and I'm sure anybody who's black can relate to the things that I'm saying. You'll face enough of that you start to realize that's their problem. It has nothing to do with you. That's their problem. That's their perception. That's jacked up. That's not on you.
Right.
It goes back to the Baldwin clip, right? Earlier, when he says, whatever they're seeing, that's not me.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the fact that you got comments from both sides, right? The white guy saying, "Why aren't you acting black?" Mm-hmm. And the black guy saying, "Remember that you are black."
Mm-hmm.
Right? In a way, it tries to frame you as putting you in a box, right?
Yeah.
Of what their experience is, mm-hmm. or what their thoughts are on maybe certain Ethiopians, mm-hmm. or certain immigrant Africans.
Right. He might have had experiences, right? So
right, certain African immigrants might have treated him a little different than that. But there is a level of understanding with some context, right? Mm. This white kid in middle school had his understanding just based off of the entertainment, the caricature, what America has developed as a caricature of a black person, mm-hmm. versus an experience from a black American, coming from a lineage of oppression,
right,
only to have African immigrants also see him as less, even if he sees everybody as black. Mm. He came off to you in a way where it's like, don't forget that you're black.
Right. And that he was like on offense, right?
Yeah. He was on offense based on like historical context of
sure
of being treated a certain way. right? So,
But see, words. I get what you're saying. I really do. But you have to watch who you say these things to. At that, I'm 13, 14. Those are some of my formative years. Look, this is something. This is something that you learn as you get older too. Like, words really carry so much with them. Actions matter. Don't get me wrong, but words really carry some heaviness to it too. Him saying that almost serves like I don't know if it's almost like a threat, right? It's almost like a warning. Like I said, like he was on offense. I don't have a choice but to be defensive at that point. And my perception, it's weird because I've had experiences like that with Black Americans where I felt like a little out of place, or they might, I might get comments about, oh, but you're not like fully Black. And you can't really entertain that. It's going to mess with your peace. It really is. Because I'm at peace with the way I see myself. It doesn't matter to me how you view me. I know what I am. I'm Black, and I'm not to sound cliche, I'm Black and I'm proud. No, really though, but I am. I'm okay with that. And no matter what, I'm going to do whatever is in my power to help advance Black people within society. God willing, with all the power that, all the energy that I have, I'll put into that.
yeah, so one of the things that I was talking about in my experience as a Salvadoran born in the United States, right, was the way that I would also see immigrants during a certain period, right? Mm-hmm. And I said that entitlement and like selfish thought comes from kind of this selfishness or this pride. It's pride because they ingrain like American pride in us. Like, we're America, the greatest.
Yeah, we're number one. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So that feeds into we're Black American, and that creates a divide between, like you're saying, being Black, because you're Black first, right? This has that American pride created a division between Black Americans and...
No, I don't see it that way. I don't think it's an entitlement. I think the underlying cause is this construct of race that's been prevalent, has been pushed, has been driven. And I think it comes down to that. Because the African immigrant that comes here has this vision that's being sold to them of the American dream, and that was formulated by who?
White Americans.
That wasn't formulated by Black Americans. So that division, if one group is telling you, hey, if you come here and you work hard and, you can achieve all these great things or whatever, all these, they're all materialistic anyway, right? Then it's easy to fall into the trap, especially when you see it work for you. If it works for you, yeah, somebody else can do it too. I did it. But that's not the reality. And I'm sure both of us have been guilty of this too. Like when we're going through our professional development, I'm sure that there's moments where we say, I worked hard and I did it. Because, you even mentioned last episode, you said, I worked hard and I got to where I needed to go. Nobody helped me. Obviously you don't feel that way now. Right? I think, fortunately, I caught myself before I felt that way. I think that's probably where we might be a little bit different in our approach. But yeah, if the dream is being sold by a group that doesn't look like you, but you're able to, still from a personal standpoint, right, achieve the things that they're telling you can achieve, then you're going to look at it as if it's a failure of the other group. You're not going to look at what's wrong with the system. The system worked for you. So in your limited scope, you got tunnel vision. In your limited scope, the system works. It worked for you. It should work for everybody else.
So have you had any experiences, you have some family here in the States, have you had any experiences where your family has, through the years, kind of reinforced these things? Because personally, I've had a lot of conversations with family members about what their thoughts are on Black American people. Mm-hmm. Just like you said, it has something to do with the immigrant idea that the American system worked for them. Mm-hmm. So why are Black people not taking advantage of this system? Right? The narrative is that the American system works. Mm-hmm. What the narrative doesn't say is that they
you
want
see all the strings attached, right?
Right. They want the hero and they want the villain.
Right.
Right. The villain's painted in the news. Mm-hmm. It's in the movies. And the villain could be anybody, mm-hmm. but they do implicitly make it seem to people coming into the system that the Black American mm-hmm. is the villain.
Yeah.
Is that
it's been like that since the beginning, though.
Yes. Right. All the fear mongering of mm-hmm. Black men stealing white women, and right. We've seen a couple mm-hmm. cases of it,
mm-hmm. or even when
history
first being freed from slavery, they just freed the slaves and said, "All right, like you're free, figure it out." And it's like there's no infrastructure, there are no programs, and then yet you blame the people you just freed. They cannot work within that system that you've set up for yourselves.
Right. They crown themselves the saviors, but mm-hmm. just for the moment, mm-hmm. not for the development afterward.
Right.
So is that something that you've seen or had to educate your family on in some instances?
Yeah, I think obviously look, we're all learning as we go. I'm not as wise as like a few years ago. I wasn't coming across. I wasn't coming across. James Baldwin's readings when I was an undergrad. I came across it maybe in the past 4 years or so. So there's a lot that I'm trying to educate myself on, and then the things that I learned, I try to engage my family members in conversation. And I mean, like I always say, my little sister's 100 times smarter than I am, and she'd be way more eloquent at stating her thoughts on being Black in America. We just can't pay her enough to have her as part of the show. No, I'm joking. But yeah, there's definitely moments where you have to educate your parents as well, because like I said, they're not going to be exposed to the same material as you, right? Your parents, even extended family, aunts, uncles. And I think that's sort of a responsibility I place on the children, like on us, being able to expand on that. But it's important, because the only way that unity is going to happen and there's going to be any types of positive impact, positive change, is through recognition and educating each other and having a better view of what it truly means to be a Black American. And, as you were mentioning, Hispanic immigrants having kind of express like they have the same type of lack of understanding. So I definitely want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think a lot of this is hard to everybody should be held accountable for their thoughts. But at the same time, these systems have been around for much longer than us or our parents or our parents' parents to understand, right? One of the things that I wanted to bring up when we were talking about the history of El Salvador was that law that they had where they wanted to create a middle class. The rich, the wealthy colonizers wanted to create a middle class, and they decided that they would legalize the marriage of white colonizers with the Native Americans of the land to try to create this class where you were no longer tied to your Native American roots. But what they did at that time was they also decided that it was better for this middle class or working class of colonizers to blend in with the Native Americans rather than with the African slaves. I think that this law was sometime in the 1800s, and it was around for like 30 or 40 years till they created a mixed class and had excluded any sort of black lineage, African lineage. So that exclusion has been around for generations. So it happens with some of these countries where people immigrate from. They've already excluded black people from their society. So coming into this society and being fed the American dream goes right back into what we were talking about, right? The system has a narrative,
right,
to make a hero and a villain.
Yeah. It goes full circle, huh?
Yep.
I think an important part is talking about the perception of refugees from Afghanistan versus those from Haiti. You remember I think it was like near the end of our first episode, we were talking about how American reception was more positive about the Afghan refugees that were coming in. We were seeing a lot of things to help set up Afghan refugee families. But we're not seeing the same for Haitian refugees. I think, it's funny. I was reading something along the lines of like American, like Haitians. Haiti's history with America runs deep, and it's not something that we learned about, I think, growing up. Haiti sent soldiers to fight for America's cause. They sent them to Savannah, Georgia during the Revolutionary War. Haiti was a trading point as far as military aid was concerned when the French were helping the American, like, quote-unquote patriots during the Revolutionary War, right? And France was able to provide billions of dollars of aid to the American cause during the Revolutionary War. Like, where do you think the money came from? It came from France's richest colony, which was Haiti at that point. So a lot of the fight for independence wouldn't have occurred if it weren't for the contributions of Haiti. And to see it now, to see, Border Patrol on horseback whipping people. I mean, a few things are more disturbing than that. And I know you also had your thoughts regarding this because you had read this article.
So before I get to the article, I do want to talk a little bit about what you were saying in terms of the way that some people have received the news about Afghan immigrants versus these Haitian immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because ultimately, it all does tie back to American interference in these countries.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Immigration is a result of the way that America has tried to, I mean, in some way they say that they're the world police.
Mm-hmm.
But they go and establish whatever systems they want in these places, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think the fact that the Afghan war has been more recent, and been a huge storyline in the media for the past 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody thinks that we've had a lot more impact on that just because it's been in the news cycle for 20 years versus something where in Haiti,
right?
I mean, it's been hundreds of years,
Mm-hmm.
right? So maybe some Americans, the ones that are considering accepting Afghan refugees, feel more responsible for that
Mm-hmm.
versus how they feel for Haiti.
Responsibility, yeah.
Regardless, not regardless, but they're just not taking into account the full history of it,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
They hear about the earthquake in Haiti and they're like, well, we're not responsible for an earthquake.
Mm-hmm.
They hear about the assassination of the president and they want to say that they're not responsible, but
Mm-hmm.
how involved has America been in picking who's in power in some of these countries,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that ties back to the article that I wanted to talk about. I had seen this, I don't know, it might have been an Instagram video where they were talking about the U.S. envoy to Haiti resigning this past week.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided to do my own research, and I came across this article. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that this article says. Because there is a difference between how the media portrays the story and the information that they want to get out.
Mm-hmm. And where is this article from?
This is from the Center of Economic and Policy Research.
Gotcha.
So essentially, if you look up the news story about this U.S. envoy resigning from his position, they tried to specify that it's based off of the inhumane deportations. But in that same resignation letter, he talks about how this immigration issue stems from the United States' entire policy with handling Haiti.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple things that he did say, and I'm just going to read this from the article. Foote, the former special envoy, did not just have harsh words for the administration's immigration policy, writing that his recommendation had been ignored or misrepresented to superiors. He called the general U.S. policy approach to Haiti deeply flawed. And this is a quote. What our Haitian friends really want and need is the opportunity to chart their own course without international puppeteering and favored candidates, but with genuine support for that course. I do not believe that Haiti can enjoy stability until her citizens have the dignity to truly choose their own leaders, fairly and acceptably. the United States has been destabilizing Haiti and generating refugees since the country emerged from the slave revolt in 1804 into a world run by slave-holding countries that felt threatened by the example of successful, self-emancipated black people. The U.S. and other nations that make up the core group, so the core group is kind of what they've named this this group that is trying to figure out what's happening with Haiti after the death of, or the assassination of their president. So the core group of foreign representatives in Haiti, along with the UN, threw their weight behind Dr. Ariel Henry, I believe is his name. They wanted him to be the prime minister. So I guess this envoy decided that, you know, it's not like what makes it right for the United States to choose who is the next leader in Haiti. Right? They're going to back him financially. They're going to back him politically. They're going to back him in the news. And that's where the truth gets hidden, right? Like, what do the Haitian people actually want? And why can't the United States help support or build a system that is what the Haitian people need instead of what the United States wants?
Right. And that goes back to reach. And similarly in Ethiopia, same thing's going on. Like, can you believe that the administration right now, the Biden administration, is recommending that Ethiopia negotiate with the terrorist group, the TPLF? That's their recommendation. The audacity. Think about that. Imagine somebody coming to the U.S. and saying, you know, let's name a terrorist group within the U.S., whatever you want to, like the KKK comes to mind, for example. And us, like, you know, of like a foreign country equating the KKK with the government of the United States. Make it make sense. You can't. It makes no sense at all. So a lot of this policy is self-serving. A lot of it is based on personal interest. And there's no care for what actually happens to the course of the country, as long as it benefits the powerful country that has their hand involved in the action.
Yep.
A lot of heavy stuff discussed today.
Yeah.
But it's important. We need to have these discussions. We, you know, obviously our perspectives are our own. And that's not to say everything that we said is the only way to look at things. Right. We have our truth. Everybody has their own truths, and these are our truths.
Right.
And, you know.
Reality is based off of what you've experienced.
Yeah.
And I think we've gone through certain phases trying to define who we are. Mm-hmm. And it's important to both communicate that, but also try to now see how that impacts other people, how our experience has impacted other people, and how we can change the course of the things that we've seen that we don't agree with.
Mm-hmm.
So from your perspective, where do you see the idea of being black in America headed?
I mean, from my perspective, I try to stay positive about things. I think this generation, I want to say just black people in general, and I'm not just referring to black Americans, or I'm not like differentiating between African immigrants and black Americans or anything like that. I just mean being black in America. I think we do a relatively good job of understanding the history. I think we have been vocal in terms of expressing our frustrations. I think other groups are realizing the things that we go through, especially, you know, with the events that stem from the George Floyd murder. that occurred. There are more conversations being had. Obviously, nothing's going to get solved overnight. But I think, especially the ones that have been privileged enough to be in a spot to kind of like get their foot in the door and keep the door open, I think we're more in a spot to help each other out. Overall, I would say I have a positive outlook. That's not to say I'm gonna have my bad days probably, where I'm exhausted, or I'll face something, whether it's at work or personal, whatever, where it may be more of a negative outlook. But I think maintaining the positivity is the only real way to go about this.
Yep. So we just have to keep spreading information. We have to keep conversating about these things.
Mm-hmm. Use this as a platform, really, right?
Right, yeah. Right. I think a lot of the times, especially because we did learn some of these things in middle school. I mean, even elementary school, I think I remember some of learning about the Jim Crow laws and everything. Mm-hmm. But it kind of just gets pushed to the side once you start focusing on what you're going to study in college, what your career is going to be. Once you start thinking about going to college and what your career is going to be, it does become more of a selfish American dream. Mm-hmm. And I think what's more American than the American dream is fighting for the rights of other people.
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
The real American spirit is fighting back against the people that oppress you.
Yeah.
And
I couldn't agree more.
The good thing is that these conversations are happening. People are waking up and realizing that that things don't have to be this way. Mm-hmm. That we don't have to accept these things for what they tell us. Mm-hmm. It is. Now, again, the real American spirit is fighting back, so you just got to keep spreading the word.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I think that's a good place to end this episode. Any last minute shout outs or anything that you have in mind? Yeah.
No, not this time.
Not this time. It feels like we should just end it the way that we planned. And we'll let James Baldwin do the honors. We'll see you next week for episode 5.
Episode 5.
Let's go. Peace.
If we were white, if we were Irish, if we were Jewish, if we were Poles, if we had, in fact, in your mind, a frame of reference, our heroes would be your heroes too. Nat Turner would be a hero for you instead of a threat. Malcolm X might still be alive. And everyone is very proud of brave little Israel, a state against which I have nothing. I don't want to be misinterpreted. I'm not an anti-Semite. But, when the Israelis pick up guns, or the Poles, or the Irish, or any white man in the world says, give me liberty or give me death, the entire white world applauds. When a black man says exactly the same thing, word for word, he is judged a criminal and treated like one, and everything possible is done to make an example of this bad nigger so there won't be any more like him.